think this is going to be probably a bit different and probably the least academic approach to the thing. And so this story is starting on one really strange place. So we were in Kosovo doing some kind of radiation hunting. So with some little device called Safecast, we were going around and trying to measure radiation around few objects that we had information that were bombed by depleted uranium. And so at that place, so I was with my friend in one like really destroyed military facility in Kosovo, really strange. And so it was some kind of field with the grass, and in one moment I felt completely the same like the guys in the movie Stalker from Tarkovsky. And so instead of like being there on this field with the grass and throwing the rocks in order to understand where there is something strange with the gravitational field, we had this device. And I was really stuck with this idea of being able to see invisible, and basically to throw rocks to different invisible things, like literally throw. And so I was thinking, okay, what else? You know, we can explore that is like invisible and obvious, because we were doing a lot of things related to internet. We started to map and to visualize different kinds of invisible infrastructures or invisible processes, because most of the thing, like when we are facing the internet, what we are seeing, it's just the interface, you know. And then there is something happening on this interface, and then we are, you know, happy or not, or whatever is happening to our life. But this amazing, big and complex process that is happening behind the screens is something that we really have not so many chances to understand what's really going on. And so we started with like first throwing rocks, little rocks, in order to understand the network topography. So we started to map all the internet service providers in Serbia. So our little tool touched each of computers that exist in Serbia, and by doing that and receiving information back, we were able to visualize this. And so we started to produce a lot of maps that looks like this. And since I'm coming from my background, it's more like art, I was like, always had this, you know, fascination with like complex graphs and how they look beautiful, and especially if they're black and black background and white lines and everything. But we struggle with, and I think Martin was speaking about this a bit, we struggle with what we can do with that, you know, like it looks great. But then in one moment in Serbia they wanted to introduce some kind of internet filtering. So we started to play with those maps. So we were able to understand what are the main points of centralization. So we were able to understand on which points they are going to install this equipment, and on which points possibly those like are this kind of process of like surveillance and filtering is happening. And then we said, okay, this is not the end of like, you know, these infrastructures that basically is there. It's not the end of the path of our little internet packets. So we started to visualize different other things. So we started to, for example, this part of the graph represent different trackers that are embedded in the websites that we are visiting. So, and then we realized, because here on the right side you see two things, you know, like big concentration. Those are like Facebook and Google and Facebook. And then, according to our research, like on 90% of the websites that we are visiting, there are some kind of Google cookies installed. And on around like almost 50% of the website, Facebook cookies. That means that even we are not using Google, and I don't know how, or not using Facebook, in 50% or 90% of the time they have information about our visits. Yeah? And that was kind of entrance to this topic of surveillance capitalism, because we understood, going deeper into that like, you know, main business model on the internet today is based on the surveillance. So it's based on like collection of data, analysis of data, and then on different ways they're trying to sell this, most of the time us as a profiles to third parties. So, and then we had like a lot of different like you know, like kinds of like investigations or around like different parts of this surveillance architecture. So one of them was like related to data retention process, but I will not go deeper into that. I will encourage you later to see things on our website. And then, and it was like really interesting. It was something between, you know, this fascination of like seeing invisible things and trying to understand invisible processes, but also it had like, especially from this moment that I will explain you now, it had this kind of detective feeling of what we were doing. So in one moment we were chasing one organization, it's called Hacking Team. So this, and they're based in Italy, and they're like really famous by being one of the biggest companies for production of cyber weapons. And basically what they're doing, they're making different tools to spy on you, reading your, I don't know, Skype conversation, Facebook, whatever, everything that you can imagine, and then they're selling this to different governments. But then in one moment there was a leak of around 100,000 emails from their email database. So we got, and most of these like investigative journalists and stuff, they started to dig the content of the communication, but we said, okay, let's not do that. Let's do what the NSA is doing. So, because like Edward Snowden said in a few moments that like for them, when he was working in NSA, like the main thing was the metadata, not the content. You know, this is the main power. So we did some kind of do-it-yourself NSA methodology, and then we started to play with this data, and you know, it's really simple. It's just from, to, and time when people are sending something, and one more line IP address. Okay, so we first you're starting with some kind of how did you say it, Martin? Spaghetti monster. Spaghetti monster. You are not able to see anything, but then when you start to filter these, then you are seeing some kind of more understandable graph, and each person on this graph it's one member of the hacking team. But then when you start to play on different ways, you're seeing the different patterns of communication, how this looks like, who is communicating with who and how, stuff like this. And then when you visualize this in another way, you are basically getting something that is really close to their organizational structure. And this is like really interesting because this is like, that was like really one dark organization that no one was knowing like how they function and what they do and stuff like this. And now suddenly we have organizational structure. And then we were tracking each of them, how they behave in time, what are they like external contacts, who is communicating with who and how from the outside world, and so on, so on. But then, for example, just by analyzing the domain names of the emails that they are like exchanging with, we were able to map somehow the ecosystem of this like really strange industry. And this strange industry is a combination of like a government organism, some kind of this agencies, then another hacking groups, then lawyers, and a lot of strange things. And now we had like a picture of how this looks like. What is the feeling about this ecosystem? And then like we were like going deeper into like communication between each organization and them, for example. And then in first here, you know, you can see that, for example, 10 people from hacking team is communicating with 10 people from this nice.com, and then you can, and then we will say, okay, there is something strange. So we went deeper into those emails, and then we found out that they are selling the same technology, but not to the governments, but also to companies, because they want to surveil workers, and so on, so on. So we were able to understand a lot of different things about this kind of dark company. And then, but the things started to be like really shady when we started to analyze individuals. So for example, the main guy is David, you know, and so we were able to understand how many emails he's sending per day, and so on, tra la 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 la. But in the moment when you start to to have patterns of his behavior, you know, you are able to understand when there is something strange, when the patterns, when there are anomalies. And this is like this dance between like patterns and anomalies, you know. So we were able to understand like when there is something strange happening to him. So for example, on 11 December and October. And then, but because I have like a visual art background, for me I'm like seeing things like through pictures, not through, okay, through data, but like the pictures are the main thing. No? So for example, this is my favorite one. So you have this kind of something strange happening here. You know, it's darker. And this is basically the moment when another research group, Citizen Lab, published the research about them. And you can really see here that there is something strange going on with them. You know? And for example, here you see again something strange. So this is the moment when he's flying to Singapore. So he's here like not having connection, and then the pattern is different because it's a different time zone. And then he's coming back again, nothing here. So we were able to play and to go deeper and deeper into this kind of personal lives of the individuals. And then we did a lot of, I don't want to go deeper into this, we did a lot of strange, interesting things. For example, just like, I don't know, like analyzing all the emails that have at Amazon.com, we were able to understand what they are buying, like which kind of equipment, books, movies, whatever. Or for example, there is one company that is providing to them, I don't know, like this flights, booking flights. So in the subject of the email you have like the name of the airport and stuff. So we were able to cross this information and to understand like where they are meeting and who is covering which part of the world and so on, so on. So it was kind of like really strange. And then it went into an analysis of these IP addresses. So we were able to understand each time when someone is sending to them an email from which location this person is. So like really, really, so it really felt like some kind of detective job, you know, and yeah. But then there was something like really interesting happening in that moment. You know, this story about algorithmic transparency started to be like a topic in academic circles and stuff like this. And we said, okay, we have some knowledge and we want to contribute to this. And there's like a golden cow of all of this, it's of course Facebook. You know? And we tried to somehow, so we are from the position of someone who is outside of the black box. You know? So we cannot call them, we cannot, you know, ask them for some data sets. So everything that we can do is to try to penetrate somehow from different angles into this black box and to try to make a picture out of it. And so how this black box looks like. So there's like around 2 billion now. It was like 1.6 billion, but now it's around 2 billion users of this black box. And so it's bigger than China, bigger than India, 5 times bigger than the United States, or 223 times bigger than Serbia. 1 billion logins into Facebook every day, 300 petabytes of user data, 1.1 trillion likes since 2004, 4.5 billion likes every day, 3.1 million likes per minute, 17 billion location tagged posts every day, 350 million uploaded photos every day, 4.7 billion items shared each day, 10 billion messages sent each day. So all of this together, this is like input into this black box. So, and somehow this black box on the other side produce $17.9 billion each year. So somehow these things that is entering, it's transformed into something else. So, and so there are a lot of, in beginning of 2000, something that was really popular to speak about immaterial labor. So what is immaterial labor? Idea is that every time when we are doing something on those platforms, or making blogs, liking, sharing, we are basically working for Facebook as some kind of immaterial workers. No? So, and then if you think in that way, there is like some kind of statistic that like averagely each person is spending more than 20 minutes per day liking, commenting, and doing this kind of things on Facebook. So it's kind of like 300 millions of working hours of free digital labor per day that we are providing to them. So, and we try to understand how this black box looks like, and one of the things that we did, we tried to do, you know, like who studied where. We tried, for example, we scraped all the accounts of Facebook employees, and then you have a lot of information there. Who studied where, how, so we tried to map this infrastructure, this human layer of this infrastructure. So who studied where, who communicated. And then we wanted to do, there was in art and media theory, there was one group called They Rule. They made like some similar things like I think 10, 15 years ago. But you cannot learn a lot, okay? You can find some strange people like Peter Thiel, that he is like found like owner of I don't know what, and this company is got a, you know, connected with FBI, and you know, like a lot of these kind of interesting stories. But this is just the human layer of this. And then we try to understand how like labor is flowing into the Facebook. So this is like, I think 1,000 employees, countries, and then to, you know, in which department they are, and so on, so on. But we didn't learn a lot about Facebook by doing that. So what the main thing is basically this: what is happening in this algorithmic process, and this is the main thing that we are not able to see. But our communication completely depends on not communication. A lot of things in our life completely depends on that. The things that you see depends on that. The things that you are, you know, like people that appears on your list, timeline, or whatever. So those algorithms, in a way, if we think about like this timeline as some form of like a theater play or movie or something like this, the director of the play is the algorithm, or a lot of them, creating this some kind of how do you say, reality show. But the director is the algorithm. So what we try to do, so first we made like, I don't know, like 50 fake Facebook accounts. We set up some kind of, I don't know, like clean computers and stuff like this. But then we really fast we realized that it's not possible. Why it's not possible? Because like you really need, like in the moment you open some web page, you already change the input for the algorithms. In different operative system, different computers, everything is influencing this, what you are seeing. So we understood that it's really hard to basically make some kind of lab experiment on that. So what we did, we first map all the inputs. So for example, first group, it's actions and behaviors. You can like, share, search, view, tra-la-la-la, add photo. So we try to map each field, each possibility that we interact with this black box. And then there is a second part, it's a profile information. And this is what you think about yourself. And then they said like a few times that basically for them this is not so important, because you can, always, most of the time you have a fake idea about yourself. And for them, this, what is actions and behaviors, this is much more important, because actions and behaviors, it's what you do and what really defines you, not what you think about yourself. So, but still in the profile information, there is a lot of information that they are collecting. And then there is a digital footprint. It's basically what the devices are saying about you. So, what is digital footprint? So, for example, device information, each device has some kind of numbers, have, you know, like a lot of different technical aspects of things that you are using, but also cookies and pixels and different kinds of tracking technologies. So we map, for example, also like all the mobile permissions that you are, different kinds of permissions that you are giving rights to them to collect, and there is like really everything, you know, you can imagine. And also different trackers, how they look like, how they are spread, stuff like this. And then the last part of this input side, it's something, it's like they also own a lot of different companies, you know, and they exchange information with a lot of different partners in a lot of different ways. You know. So, and on the other side, it's like a product. So what is the product? Product by it's of course us, you know. And then I really like to think about like this. There is Chomsky really nicely they explained, for example, traditional media, and they said, okay, when you the product of the magazine, it's not the magazine, but the public of the magazine, the reader of the magazine. It's the public. It's the product that you are selling. No? So, but the difference between the traditional media and nano-targeting and Facebook and other platforms, like similar platforms, is that like when you are selling magazine, okay, public of the magazine, you are selling like some kind of wide target group. You can say it's intellectuals from this city, mostly male or whatever. So this is what you have as a product. But here, because like they are keeping the track of each one of us, and track, I mean like really deeply track, they are able to sell each of us individually on a lot of different ways. So based on age, gender, location, languages, education, ethnic affinity. Ethnic affinity, it's really interesting. I think it's just in the United States, but they said it's not like your ethnicity, but affinity to ethnicity. That's kind of, you know, like really crazy thing. Life events, birth of the child, expecting a baby, likely to engage in politics, conservative, liberal, whatever, different interests, different behaviors that you have, different devices that you use. So a lot of different types of targeting. But so and then the main question, it was like how to basically map what is happening in between those two sides. So we find around like 7,000 to 8,000 different publicly available patents. And in those patents it's explained, but they're explaining to some, you know, like in some way they're explaining like some parts of this system. So we started to read all of those patents and to try to find like what is, you know, is there something that can fit to this mosaic that we are building. So slowly we were getting the shape of how the process looks like. So there is something called action store, content store, app store, and the heart of the system, it's a social graph. And so we spoke a lot about social graph, but what is really interesting here, so what it means? It means like every time when you are uploading something, every time when you are saying something, commenting something, doing whatever, clicking, there is a one more node basically appear. So each one of us is a one node, and everything that is created is another node. And then between those nodes, there is relations. So for example, if between me as a one node and the picture that I uploaded, there is a relation uploaded. But someone else can have a different relation, like, share, comment, tag, whatever. So at the end, you have like one huge map that is interlink all the objects within the system. So like people, events, whatever exists in this universe. And just to try to understand, if we were thinking about this spaghetti monster yesterday, today, this is like billions and billions, or let's go back and try to think about those numbers, then 10 billion, 3 trillion, all of this is mapped. So this map is not made to be understood by human beings, and it cannot be understood by human beings. It's made to be understood by the algorithms. So let's try to understand this map, not to understand because we cannot. So we have a map as a one playground, one huge social graph, and then different algorithms, different mathematical functions or whatever are trying to extract the meaning out of this map. Okay, and so there is like a lot of different patterns describing different parts of this game, but it's kind of not 0-1. Most of the time, it's something that is really fuzzy, and in a way, so they are, for example, able to say that, for example, I am 70%, 73% this and 32% that, belongs to this and that category, and by that I am number 1700, some kind of unique profile. No? So there are a lot of strange algorithms, and what for me what was like really interesting is that this it's not also just like those main categories that we as a human being can understand. It's also the system is creating its own categories of meaning, own like correlation between things. So, and it's also like, if you think about this system, and this system it's constantly evolving, you know, because we are all the time giving more and more information and saying, okay, now we are more closer to this, now we are more closer to this. This is this feedback loop. It's this cybernetic system in which they always have like a new information about it. It's like updating the system. One of my favorite algorithms, it's like related to routine estimation, and this is something that was for me interesting because of this prior research on hacking team and individual patterns and anomalies. So routine estimation is basically each time when you log in, you're giving basically through IP addresses your location. Yeah? So they are counting this person, it's like logging in the morning here, in the afternoon there, and then by this you are creating a pattern. And by this pattern then they can understand this is home, this is job, this is kindergarten, this is this, this is that. And then when you behave differently, they start to analyze anomalies. So that means that you are traveling, or you are sick, or you are something else. And then this information about like changes of our routines is used to create some new knowledge and stuff like this. And then what was for me, because I have this kind of like bit socialist points of view, you know, it's interesting how they are you know, they are all the time trying to put the label on us. So this is the price on you, and so they try to separate us into different groups according to our like behavior. And it's not just like financial transactions or stuff like this that can define that we are rich or not and that we belong to this social strata. It's also like, you know, the music we like, the part of the city we live in, everything, all of those informations are basically like creating the price tag that is shown on us. But so at the end we have some kind of map. And this crazy map is, you know, it's a crazy map. It's probably the only map that exists about this kind of algorithmic process within Facebook. But it's really inaccurate. And this is the problem, so we should not think that we can do that. This map is like really estimation of the process. And the thing is that, why? For example, different patents are from different periods, and even if they have patents, it doesn't mean that this algorithm is really working, and they're like all the time changing the different algorithms and so on and so on. So this map, it's something similar to the map of, I don't know, like world from 4th century, you know, where you don't have, for example, America still discovered, or Africa looks funny, or, you know, these kind of things. And as a process, it's really like going with a torch through the woods of some kind of dark woods of some kind of, you know, like strange processes. And still, if we go back to, how do I have time? Not yet? Ah, cool. So it's like, and still there is something that I really like to think of, it's a bias of me who now, like I was like slowly like showing you this map and that map, and they look complex, and because of this you kind of believe in what I'm saying, and I have like professor whatever, so it's like, but basically I put you completely into my storytelling, and it's like really hard for anyone to test, is this what I was saying is true or not, no? It is, it's Okay, but still, like, there is so many, by visualizing data, you are able to you're able to tell a story. And you are able to show the data in different way, that it looks like this and like that and stuff like this. So it's like I'm really starting to be really critical about all of this thing. And then I don't know how much I have time for this, but then I was thinking about something completely 5 minutes. Okay, something completely different. So I started to work with one artist from Barcelona, Joana Mol, and she was into this kind of materiality of technology, materiality of the internet, like how much Google, what is like, CO2 footprint of Google, what is the So I started to think about, okay, we were like drawing and analyzing those maps and those processes and stuff like this. But then I realized that each of those machines that are part of this process, they have their own history. They have their own history that in geological sense. So we can track from each of those devices, like how they're born, from which materials, which metals, how these metals are moving around the world. And by doing that, then you are seeing another part of the story. And this another part of the story, it's related to invisible labor. And basically the fact that during this process of birth of all of those devices and systems and infrastructure, there is a lot of exploitation. So we try to map the process of birth, life and death of one device. In this case it's Amazon Echo, by going through, starting from the geological process, then going through the elements, mines, smelters, refiners, component manufacturers, assemblers, distributors, so on, so on. And what was like really striking for me, that even it's so physical, and even if it's like thousands and thousands, millions of people working in this process, it's not more transparent than algorithms. And for example, when I think Intel wanted to find out from materials from which their microprocessors are made, like where they are, from which mines and stuff like this, they needed 2 years to research their own supply chain process. But what was like interesting for me, there is some kind of inequality between, like, so for example, like if we are starting here, like from Congo and Africa, it's like almost like, okay, first you have unpaid labor. This is like when we are using devices. No? But then you have these underground miners and stuff like this. And then in one moment you have a gap. And then after this, like people earning like from 0 to 1,000. But then the list goes like really, really, really high, really high, and really high, really high, and really high. And this is CEO, but some kind of average CEO in the United States. It's not Jeff Bezos, who is like on the top of the pyramid. Jeff Bezos is earning, I think, 200-something millions times more than the person who is starting the process. So that was kind of interesting for us. And then in the middle of this map, there is like a process of like mapping of this invisible infrastructure. So mapping basically of this something that's called artificial intelligence. And then you again, you can find out that like there is a lot of labor there, like a lot of invisible labor, a lot of new fields of darkness, new fields of untransparency. And the new one that is like really interesting now, it's like even algorithms that I were trying to explain, it's like they're really not so transparent, but the neural networks that are like the heart of the process of like machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's even more not transparent. So our capacity to understand those systems is getting smaller and smaller. So there is like and the problem is like even, so there was like a lot of talks how we are going to solve the problem of algorithmic transparency. The question is, in order to face that, we will need to have such a bureaucracy that we will spend a lot of money. And another problem, it's like that those companies that, you know, like rule the world now, they have financial possibility to buy the best researchers, best experts and stuff like this. So our capacity to deal with that and time that we need to invest in like trying to understand those black boxes, it's like really, really, the process is like really hard to do that. So I don't know, I will stop here. Yeah, wait. Switch to the website. I always forget to do that. So there is a website called labs.rs, and there you can find the stories. And there are like a lot of other stories that I didn't tell. It's for example, here there is like we got like 1 month of browsing history of one journalist from Switzerland, and that was also like really funny. And then we were doing like mapping of, for example, information warfare, this troll hunting before it was popular, before it was called fake news and stuff. So we have like one of my favorite research related to strange, unusual forms of networking in Havana. So it's kind of different internet. And yeah, lots of different things. So please feel free, and I'm encouraging you to maybe. Texts are maybe long, but and they have a lot of nice pictures. So
thank you, Vladan. We have a few minutes for questions, and you can actually speak up. Yeah, you have the microphone.
We already have a microphone.
Prepared.
Bring me those questions.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting, and actually I was able to read some projects from your website before, and I can say that by reading them and exploring them, I can say that they seem pretty credible, and I can say that they are true from like perspective of reader and viewer. And actually, I wanted to ask you about well, some other project that you probably haven't mentioned here, which is about internet infrastructure of Serbia, because it's also quite an interesting project to me, and I wanted to ask you to maybe elaborate more about this project, how it was done, how you were working with the material, how you're collecting this data and trying to map, and also to ask were you considering some historicizing of this map of the infrastructure, trying to understand like how this network emerged, how this infrastructure was built, and where the roots for different parts of this infrastructure, like for example, you know. Like internet cables, transatlantic internet cables have their roots from even before internet era, where there were telegraph cables, first telegraph cables, so basically they repeated the same route and the same infrastructure. So whether there are some historical part of this infrastructure map in your project. And the other question regarding this Facebook case regarding, well, this is probably called somehow algorithmic governance, where there are some rules that are not rules, real rules, because they were defined by not by like social agreements, but by the algorithm. And I was having a discussion about this topic about Facebook and algorithmic governance with Gert Lowing, who is a media theorist in Amsterdam, and his answer to what actually should we do with this kind of problem, with this kind of issue about algorithmic governance, that we need to step back, few steps back, in order to make internet infrastructure decentralized more, and in order to make it less profile oriented as it is now. I mean, the interface and design of each internet project is supposed to be less profile oriented, then we will have some beautiful and successful internet. So basically, my question, well, as you said, you have some socialist point of view. So from your socialist point of view, what is the Like, I know that this is not part of your project, but maybe you have some opinion. What can we do? What is supposed to be done with this algorithmic governance structure in general?
I think we can take this complicated, extensive question as the first one, and then...
Okay. So, the first one, so the internet infrastructure in Serbia for us was always like we started from there. So that was like our first research, and then what we did, it's like just to try to map, to try to understand the system, to try to ping as much as we can. Like first the equipment and computers that exist within the Serbian IP range. But then we were trying to understand like what people from Serbia are like accessing. So how how the flow of data and flow of information is like flowing out from Serbia or into Serbia. And there is not a lot into Serbia, there is a lot of out from Serbia. Because like I think like 60–70% of the data and visit is going out. And then by doing this research, we were able to understand that in internet you have like airports, you know, like you have Frankfurt, for example, and Frankfurt is also airport for data as well. And for example, 50% of the traffic from Serbia is going through Frankfurt, through one city. You know? And then you understand that if you think about data flows, you should not think about just your regulation, but we should think also like what the Germans do. And what is their regulation, because they can access to 50% of the metadata that we are producing. And then, for example, we find out that like another interesting spot is Amsterdam, but mostly like related to porn content. So it's like this kind of red district of internet again and again. So there is a lot of, you can read the story about internet infrastructure. It's like it can be read from different angles. For example, like even if you're thinking about historical data, you know, like there is like there is a tree called Petra something. That was like from somewhere in Southeast Asia, and in order to build a cable, they realized that this material it's like you know, isolating the copper. In order to build transatlantic cable and this first cable, they completely like this tree almost extinct. So they killed all the trees that exist out there. So there is always, when we are speaking about infrastructure and this material aspect, there is always different stories, like of labor, of materials, where the materials is coming from, how, who. Because most of the time we are, you know, like thinking about interfaces and then thinking about how Facebook look like and what they do with friends and, you know, but behind, like there's a lot of people like being treated really unfairly in a lot of different ways. And I always like to think about this difference between like, you know, like surface and underground, and how those different layers of undergrounds are not visible or hidden in a lot of different ways. And this is part of this Californian ideology to you know, promote this idea of cloud, of, you know, immateriality, of ephemeral process, you know, all of this. But behind all of this there is someone digging. So each time when you send an email, there is someone dig something little, maybe just with a spoon, but still, there is like, related to Facebook, what we can do. Me personally, we just spoke, I bought like a piece of land. Trying to explore ideas of like this kind of the grid living, and then there is this is one movement like related to this like neo-ludist, maybe not so aggressive, to like destroy something, burn or like destroy few, you know, scientific centers around the world, but more like trying to rethink like technology from different way, you know, like, and the values and everything. And then there is another group of people, another, let's say, group is trying to change the system from within, So trying to make a better laws, trying to influence Facebook, and then market is going on the trial and like Congress, and like all of this. So trying to change the system. And then the third one, it's believing that it can be better if there is another values. So for example, if the code is open, if there is no data collection, so there are like few different like paths, and I don't know which one it is, and I think we should do all of them, or try all of them. Try to change system from within, try to go to the mountain, try to try different things. And I don't believe that there is one answer to this problem.
Love is the answer.
Yeah. And a death of capitalism as well.
Do we have more questions?
I have one question. Did you get a job offer from Facebook? Or, in other words, to ask, did you get any response from the structures that you tried to investigate?
So the moment when we made this Facebook research, I think like 2 years ago or something like that. But then it was like published in one moment on BBC, and then it was kind of like and then I was watching the visits. And it's like really bad thing because I'm like doing everything to show how this surveillance economy is working, and I'm basically also following who is coming to the website. So I'm guilty for that, and I turned this off afterward. No, never mind. But and the biggest percentage of the visits in that moment was from Palo Alto, or what is the name? So all of them jumped into to see like.
To know what they're doing.
Yeah, because we were like profiling, making these kind of graphs about like employees and stuff like this. So it was like probably one day wonder in Facebook. And then on one exhibition in London, I was not there, but the guy, one of the Facebook people came there, and he was watching the map, and then he said, like the curator of the exhibition, he said like, it looks correct. So
It's a recognition.
yeah. So that's relation with Facebook. But usually I'm like after like giving talks. It depends on the public, but sometimes I'm like approached by people who want to give me a job on like a marketing agency, like to profile people and help them do that better and stuff like this.
Are there any other comments, questions? My question is rather related to historiography. Do you think that in like 50 years, I understand that you are not a professional historian, but do you think the old history writing practice will be completely replaced by such things? And how would you call this genre of work, intellectual work?
There is so I'm fan of few. There is one research paper related to the death of Friendster, and it's done through the network graphs, explaining these last days of Friendster, and Friendster was Facebook before Facebook, and it was also so big and monopoly on social networking, but it dies. And so you can read the history and the life and death of one social network by analyzing data as well. And this is like for me like really, and I see this really as some kind of history, like topic, like trying to understand the networks, trying to understand, because they are also, it's not just about relation between humans, it's also how those systems are made, and they are so influencing now our lives that if we think to make like good history work in the future, we will need to include the history of technology, and history of the networks, and history of data exploitation, history of different processes.
Thank you, Vladan. We need to move on.